Do you know those little Gumby things that like people, they put out for flyers? They're like the blow up things where they blow air through. They do them for Halloween and stuff like that.
Arms wave.
They are doing all these like crazy things up here, but they are firmly rooted in the ground.
I like to think of this as the key to getting through menopause, a strong foundation.
Hello, SoulNet friends.
Welcome, SoulNet listeners.
Hello, SoulNet friends.
Welcome to season 3 of the podcast and our special series on the joys and pains of menopause.
We're kicking off our menopause series with a very special guest, our very own Dayna Bango. Dayna is an exercise specialist and wellness practitioner with over 20 years of experience in coaching. And as a former athlete, she brings a unique blend of science and soul to help women thrive during menopause. Today, she's sharing her insights and practical tips and wisdom on functional movement, training, nutrition, and mindfulness for an empowered menopause experience.
You know, one of the key points that I'm hoping that, with you guys and our listeners here today is that the more stable the physical body is, the more we can handle some of the experiences and these unknowns that we go through in perimenopause. So we've got the hormones that are fluctuating. So what can we do to kind of find that stability? And then when we have the emotional things and the pressures that continue to build, at least we have a bit of a foundation to go back to. Nutrition and exercise play a huge role of what we experience from a standpoint of PMS. And these are little microcycles of what we actually experience as we're moving into menopause. So if we can even, set some foundational stuff while we're still having regular cycles, or if we're having sporadic cycles, these are all things that we can use all the way through.
Yeah, I love it. I'm excited too, because I think I've been in perimenopause for, I don't know. I think it's been a long time, guys. Like I haven't had a cycle for a long time, but I still am producing estrogen and testosterone, as my Dutch test revealed recently. My progesterone is down. So I'm just really, doing some research and figuring things out. But I feel like in my body, I've tried to maintain a certain amount of exercise so that I wasn't going to lose muscle mass like in, fast, quickly. Because that was something that, I was reading about years ago, is like that once your estrogen and your hormones start to change at this time in your life, your muscle mass will decrease, your cortisol will be affected, which is the stress hormone. You will get, that all of these things will produce more belly fat.
Yeah.
So just thinking about all those things, Dayna, we just wanted to really kind of dive in to the truth about that, right? The truth about muscle mass decrease, belly fat, and how nutrition and movement, what we should be doing.
And brain optimizations.
Yes, because it's all connected to the brain.
Exactly. So I will say, just to clarify too, Meg, your point around muscle mass, the loss of muscle actually starts way, way, way before we even get close to menopause. And so if we do nothing to help preserve muscle mass from the time we are 25, we will start this very, very slow atrophy of muscle. So this is actually started way, way back. Now, the good news is we can build muscle at any age. There is no, I wouldn't say there's no right or wrong time, because ideally the earlier you do this, the more you're actually going to preserve some of that muscle, but we can build muscle at any age. We're talking about strength, flexibility, mobility, and balance as being like the 3 main areas to really lean into. If you haven't got these parts in play already, these are really, really foundational. And so the strength piece, of course, for that preservation of the muscle strength, for the bone density piece, for overall the joint health, and how that empowers us kind of in our everyday life. And then we look at, balance as being, if we are losing some of that bone density, our numbers are maybe starting to show up with some osteoporosis. Our bones are becoming more brittle, or so soft. And so what happens when the bones start to soften is that they are at more risk for a break when you fall. So if we have balance or a poor, what we call the vestibular system, and the only way this vestibular system gets activated is through being out of balance. And when that vestibular system starts to go, you are at greater risk for falls. And then you take a fall, you break something, and then all of a sudden you start to become more and more sedentary. And it becomes this really, really slippery slope of, do you ever actually get that quality of life back that you once had? So it can be as simple as standing on one leg in your kitchen, holding on for a bit of support, closing your eyes. These don't have to be complicated ways, but it is very much a clear situation of, if you don't use it, you lose it.
That's, oh my
That's
God.
so true.
Dayna.
Yeah. And I actually really like to think about, like, during perimenopause and menopause, what we're doing in our everyday life that we want to continue to be strong for. Gardening. I want to lift my grandchildren up one day.
Yeah.
I carry very heavy groceries. I've got a house with teenagers. I got a lot of food coming in. I've never really thought about thinking about the next part of my movement plan in terms of functioning optimally in my life, because that's where we're at. Like, I think there's a big part of acknowledging in my 50s that, guess what? I can't do what I did when I was 30. And I have to be thinking and present and setting myself up for success. So I really, really love that. I think it's important too, though, don't you think, Dee, that like everybody has their own knowledge around their own body?
Yes.
Like, I wonder if you can just speak to that. Like, I've been kind of, fit, and I always walk, as you know, and hike, and I do a couple of days of, hours of strength training a week. However, I just pulled a bicep muscle when I was playing with my dog. I didn't even feel it. Didn't feel it. Went about my day, woke up with like a very serious bruise running along my bicep muscle.
Oh, wow.
And I just think it's important for our listeners too, that understanding, even somebody who does strength training in the gym twice a week can, at this age, get injured pretty easily.
This is the time that we are at the biggest risk for injury. And so if we go specifically to women's health, all of these estrogen changes they're wreaking havoc on all sorts of things. So this does not actually, this bicep does not actually surprise me. So I have two kind of things to say on that. The first one would be, strength training is not the same as work on flexibility and mobility, which is a really important part that is kind of not, we've got all this modern, like this new language is being talked about menopause, and I'm hearing a lot of emphasis on strength training, which is great, but equally as important is mobility and work on your connective tissue. So that flexibility part. So, and then coupled with what you just shared around the bicep tendon. So a lot of women, probably around 40 on, or many women, unfortunately experience something called frozen shoulder, or so we become at greater risk. And this has to do with the changes in the estrogen. I would say active women specifically, frozen shoulder, ACL injuries, more at risk for just more injuries in general. So really putting on, remembering kind of 3 categories of what you're going to take care of. And strength training is just a component. And I can't say enough about the connective tissue, and stretching feels good to us. It doesn't take a lot of time.
So is that what you recommend for like prevention? But I guess it is prevention a bit.
Maintenance.
Like, what would you, maintenance?
Yeah.
So I like to really think about, and this goes back to where we talked about the brain piece too, and this is really, really important. So when we talk about our connective tissue, so think about the layers. So you've got the bone structure, and then you've got the muscles that layer on top of that. And then I like to think, if you look at what our connective tissue looks like in an anatomy textbook, it's really fascinating. It looks actually like a clear cellophane jumpsuit that pretty much slides over our entire muscular skeletal system. This like shrink wrap is where all of the communication between our brain gets through to our muscles. So this is all about communication. And it says when this shrink wrap it's not bound too tightly, we get freedom of movement to the joints. We get out of bed in the morning and we're spry. We're not, over going, oh, my back or my foot. There's
Right.
there's fluidity. There's pep. Some of my clients like to say it is like the spring in the step. Right. So we've got movement. And then we've also got I find as we're aging, the really, really important piece is that this is also our brain communicating with those joints, which goes around to coordination. So if when our brain says, move right leg to get our run from the bus, and our body can respond, we don't get hit by the bus or we don't fall into the puddle or whatever that is. So it's connective tissue and mobility and stretching are really about that freedom of movement in all of the joints, as well as communication between the cells.
I love that. I love the metaphor of the shrink wrap because I can visualize it.
Yep.
And I don't want ever to be tightly bound.
No.
Like I don't like, so it's like, who wants to be in a shrink wrap that is like suffocating?
Yeah.
So so now you're saying like, breathe into that, like, stretch that. Water, probably hydration, comes to my mind.
Yeah.
Like for keeping that fluid, that I really appreciate that because I can actually take that and be thinking about that when my body feels tight. That's the signal to stretch a little bit more, hydrate.
Give it space.
What are some of your, because I love some of the tips you were giving to stimulate neurologically and kind of like, because we can still grow new neural connections.
Absolutely.
We can still exercise our dendrites. Yeah.
On that note, because estrogen, the drop, right, is very much linked to all of these things, right? So the muscle mass, the belly fat, the bone density, the tissue, and also the connectivity to the brain.
Absolutely. Well, and if you actually think about movement in general, anybody that's done, even a walk or a run or like a workout, and if you're really present, how you get these like amazing ideas that come about, all of a sudden you're like, you've been working through a problem and you're literally working it out in your workout because what you weren't sure of in the end, you're like, oh, I've got that. So that right there is an example of movement activating your brain. Let's actually go specifically into like what makes up a good strength training routine for somebody. Let's say you're just getting started, or even if you're experienced, but maybe you're having some injuries. So you're kind of going, okay, let me take a step back and see what I need to be doing. We focus on these planes of motion, and they are all what would be termed now as like functional exercise. So they're based on how we move. In everyday life, we push things away, we push doors open, we pull things towards us, we squat to pick something up, or we deadlift to pick something up. We press, we reach for things overhead, and then we rotate. We maybe grab something and we twist, even pulling on a chainsaw, Eilena, a chainsaw thing.
That's a full and a twist.
Exactly. So these are what we call the foundational movements. We build our programs around these foundational movements. So you can do the big barbell stuff and the dumbbells, but you can also build muscle and your bone density through following along the little machine circuit at your gym. It doesn't have to be all these fancy things that you see in social media, but you do want to focus on like big muscle groups, things like a bicep curl or a tricep extension. You're not getting a lot of bang for your buck. It's one of the things that actually has broken my heart in the years of the gym. I see these people trying to they're putting in their work, but they're not working on the right stuff. Yeah. It's too small of a muscle to actually like do much for you. So you think about the big muscles, anything that involves the legs and these arms and multiple muscles at the same time are where you're going to get the most bang for your buck.
Okay.
So that's kind of your general foundations. Big movements, squats, lunges, pushing movements, pulling movements. I'd even say if you don't have very good, posture and maybe you do have some shoulder things going on, I'd even mind maybe not doing too much in the way of the push movements because they do pull us posturally here. And if you're not doing any connective tissue work and flexibility work, you're not getting proper range of motion out of the shoulder. So you're better to work on pulling the posture back and strengthening that back body. Yeah, pulling movements to pull yourself back.
So like rowing machine?
Rowing, amazing.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything in a rope and all the different variations that kind of go along with that are amazing.
Okay.
The other thing that often shows up, I think, a lot of us can cite, ourselves or friends too, where we get, back pain or neck pain. A neck pain is a direct correlation of, posture too. So every inch forward we come from the plumb line, which is essentially the ear lining up with the shoulder, the hip, and the knee and the ankle. Every inch forward, we add 10 pounds of weight to the cervical part of our spine. So making sure that we're not doing what we call the chicken head poke. It's like this whole little, that's not a good thing.
Right. Like you stick you almost have to consciously be aware of where your chin is.
Absolutely.
Like I sit at a desk and I write and I do a lot of work at my desk and I end up looking into my computer and my chin like kind of follows my gaze. And I end up doing that like chicken thing.
Yeah. No peck.
Yeah, no backpack.
No backpack.
Yeah. So really, that's a really good reminder. Thank you for that.
Well, and then if we further go down that rabbit hole, if we're forward, we're actually compressing the diaphragm. And so we're all of a sudden not getting proper breath. We're not getting full oxygenation to all of the brain, all of the extremities. Like these pieces are really important. The diaphragm also gives a massage to the internal organs. As we're getting older, all of our systems are starting to just not work as optimally. So these simple things that we can do around even posture can really help to keep the functioning of the liver and the kidneys and stomach, all of the digestive tract. So really, really important, layered, right?
I love that point.
What's your perspective on abdominal work? For me, I'll just give a personal example. I've had scoliosis my whole life. So that misalignment, my body's adapted to, but also because of that misalignment, my back body is stronger than my front, right? And so I'm naturally pronated from the scoliosis. So underdevelopment in the chest and abs were strong from dance. But what is your prescription for ab activation?
I have a couple thoughts on this. So when we're doing big compound lifts, this is the really fun part. We're doing them well. So things like squats, like deadlifts, like lunges, even a good push-up and stuff like that. And we're doing it intentionally. We're actually activating a lot of our abdominal and our core muscles already. So by doing those particular movements, we are absolutely getting activation. I actually feel like so there's appropriate kinds of abdominal work. I think we need to not just think about, crunches, sit-ups, those old school styles of things. So with clients, I do a lot of wood chopping. You talked earlier about functional patterns and like we were talking about pull and rotate. Well, a wood chop in the gym is a pull. You can pull, rotate, you're putting those pieces together. That's a core exercise. It's actually a full body exercise, but it's way more relative to what you're doing in your life. So you're prepared to do the gardening and the chores. Like how many people go, oh my God, like I'm in the gym, but I'm doing like these kind of weights, but then I go and I work in the garden, which is a whole bunch more of rotating and pushing and pulling and getting into weird positions. And they throw their blackout.
Yeah, exactly.
You can bring in some of these pieces. And I can't tell you the times I've had clients come to me. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad we've been doing that exercise because I was in the garden and I had to haul these rocks over the retaining wall and onto these things. And they're like, I was strong and I was able to do it. And they had the recall because I spend a lot of time with clients about like, what's your setup before you lift, right? Like just don't just set the weight and start throwing things around. Like set yourself. We talk a lot here on the pod about presence, right? Let's say you got your barbell over your back and you're thinking about what your stance is. You're thinking about what you're going to engage, where your focus points are going to be. And you are absolutely present with that big hunk of weight that you're carrying on your back. And that gives you the opportunity to, when you go to your everyday stuff, they're all neurally grooved. You've done that squat 1,000 times. So when you go pick up that thing in your yard, your body and your brain know what to do and you don't get hurt, right?
Yeah. Can I just say, for those of our listeners who maybe don't have you in their life every day, don't have a trainer that they can text or call or go to, what can you recommend for someone who is feeling like, wow, this is really resonating?
Yeah.
I'm really feeling this. I want to incorporate some of this, but I don't know where to go or who to talk to.
So I would absolutely say if you can find the budget, you can work with someone like me in smaller doses. It doesn't have to be all the time, but have someone get you on a good program that is meant for you, because that individuation is really, really important. There is a science to how we build muscle as well. And, a lot of women are afraid of like heavy weights, but those 5-pound weights that you're throwing around, unless that's really heavy for you, but odds are pretty good. Those 5-pound weights are not creating enough stimulus to actually build muscle. So you want to make sure you're not spinning your wheels in there.
Yeah.
There's some really good research about directly relating to strength training and perimenopause as it relates to like hot flashes and some of the symptoms that we experience, that really we only need about 2 sets of a full body workout. So anywhere between say 6 to 8 exercises. So again, you think about a push exercise, a pull exercise, a squat, a hinge, a rotational exercise, which pretty much makes up anywhere in that kind of number.
Hinge and rotation. Okay.
Yeah. And a hinge would be a deadlift, deadlift kind of a thing. Okay. So if you can, create this program around these basic principles, and this research study was very good about saying it only needed 2 sets of exercises. So we talk in sets and repetitions when it comes to the language of strength training. Let's say I'm on my squats. I've hopefully got some extra weight, but body weight is absolutely a great starting ground for everybody. If you don't know how to, if you can't squat with your own body weight, then you kind of need to build up to actually loading some weight, right? You want to work on foundations. So I'm picking up, let's say I'm picking up my barbell and I'm doing a squat. I'm going to do up and down anywhere from 8 to 12 times. And then I'm going to maybe have a little rest.
And same thing for that second set. You may want to increase your repetitions a little bit, or your weight for that second set, is you do want to be feeling some fatigue by the time you get to the end of those repetitions. And then once you've done that, you're going to move on to your next exercise, do 2 sets there, and keep moving your way through your program until you've finished your, 6 to 8 exercises that you're doing that day. And you can, of course, do other ways of training, supersetting, etc. But for the most part, this is going to be enough for most of us to build strength.
Okay.
You can do more. I do more than that. And but these are just generalized guidelines of if you are starting out twice a week, picking that
twice a week,
twice a week. Yeah. This was a very specific study. It was over in, I believe it was either Finland or Sweden. And they did a very specific study around women in perimenopause that were just getting started and what template was going to be helpful. And so it was,
so it's like realistic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's all of it, right? You start throwing out like strength training, connective tissue, like lifestyle. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, like where's my time? It doesn't, so it has to be realistic, right? I think one of the things I really wanted to highlight today too, is that like, this is a time of our life that like less is actually more in some ways. If you're having, especially the hands, which is often where stuff shows up at this age, if you've got some early signs of arthritis and then you're like asking the body to do strength training requires a lot of grip strength. And there are certain positions like even yoga, right? As amazing as it is, I have a lot of clients where I have to modify certain positions because staying on the pressure on the wrists is too much. So that less is more approach is about, okay, we need to be doing these things, but we're not training like we're 20s or like we're in our professional athletes. And I think is equally important is for some of our listeners to hear that this is a really, important time for us to be moving and taking care of our bodies in this way. For some of our other listeners, it might be the wake up call of maybe it's time to slow down and modify some of the movements that you are doing because maybe you're training too hard. So that less might be more for a lot of us.
I feel like you've given us so much to think about, Dee. What I've learned about stress and cortisol levels. So I just want to throw that in there because that also, like when our stress is high, our cortisol levels are affected, which then tires us out. Like if you're feeling tired and fatigued, may want to consider checking out your cortisol levels. So stress affects the mind, body, and the soul, as we know. And so I just want to add that in, like even talking about less is more, like don't overstress.
For women going through big changes, I would say, how would you speak to that, Dayna? Like for a lot of women go through divorce in midlife or loss of a loved one or financial challenge of some kind, right? So they're in the stress, they're in the cortisol spikes.
So I've had very good success I had a full adrenal system crash that relates to cortisol levels as well in my earlier years. And I've also coached a number of clients through this. I've got a lot of type A executive clients, of course, over the years. And so stress is a big part of that. It's a fine line between cortisol levels just in fight or flight.
That's right.
Exercise is absolutely a great way of working through our cortisol levels and supporting our hormonal health from a stress perspective. But that's where we say less can sometimes be more. So that hour workout. So if you think about, and I'm going to take endurance sports, something like running or cycling where you're doing it for typically fairly like longer durations, right? So what actually happens in the body is after 30 minutes, we actually start to accumulate cortisol and stress. So if you are in a really, really stressful time of your life, I'm going to offer a nugget in the way of think about them as exercise snacks. So they're short and sweet. They can be intense because the cortisol levels will respond and stress levels will respond very well to more intensity, but short duration. So that cortisol level has a chance to kind of reduce some of the stress that's feeling accumulated, but it's not adding more to the pile. So short and sweet.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Love it.
What I discovered, speaking to your point, Dayna, is like 10 minutes run for me is perfect. I don't do anything more anymore. No. I don't need to because that adds to the spiking that I'm trying to regulate now.
Exactly.
The cortisol spiking that I'm now trying to regulate.
I love that. Exercise and movement snacks. Because when you're stressed, instead of going and get a bag of chips, go and take a body snack. Yeah. Take a mind and body and soul snack.
Or punching bag for 2 minutes or jog, rage run for 10 minutes,
It's really important that we do talk a little bit about like the nutritional part of what happens. Because a lot of the things that we're talking about that are happening in the physical body are linked to inflammation. And one of the ways that we can directly impact inflammation are what we are putting in our mouths and what we're actually digesting in our life. So food plays a really big role in our health at all ages, but especially during this time of life. A lot of the foods that build inflammation in the body are things that also go hand in hand with the lifestyle diseases that show up in the way of diabetes and heart disease. So high insulin spiking foods like sugars that break down to sugar. So that would include all your white sugars, your flours, most of your like grains break down to sugar. Alcohol breaks down to sugar in the body. So reducing this, and it doesn't mean you can't eat grains because they're part of a healthy diet, but this is a time of your life, or if you're at another time of your life and you're having some health things, a low inflammation diet can go very, very long way in helping you feel better, as well as for conditions such as autoimmune. So a really important piece. So a reduction in some of the grain intake, lots of, increases in obviously like vegetables. If I look at food diaries of my clients over the years, most people are not eating enough vegetables and they're eating way too many portions of grains. And then of course, this is also an important time where we're, I don't want to focus too much on protein, but it is an important part of building muscle. And I think a general rule for listeners and for all of us is like, if you can have a serving of concentrated protein at each of your meals, that should make sure that you're meeting your requirements. So that could be, there's a piece of chicken at dinner. There's maybe breakfast is eggs if you eat them, or it's got some kind of yogurt in there. Lunch has got to get another serving of some form of concentrated protein, whatever that looks like. If you're vegetarian, maybe that's getting stacked. I kind of think that it's harder for vegetarians vegetarians and vegans to meet the protein. So you can stack on things like a vegetarian protein, like a tofu. You can stack on beans, and you can layer in some seeds and nuts that'll start to kind of further boost those quantities up. So meeting it, supplementing if needed with protein powders, but not relying on them either. They're, all supplements are supposed to be as a replacement to when we can't meet our food requirements. So those are kind of just some simple pieces that are really, really helpful when we're talking about how that's going to show up in the way for those of us that might be getting the joint pain, especially because there's definitely that arthritis is worse when we eat those sugary kind of acidic parts in our body. And healthy fats is another big one too. So for the dryness that we're experiencing, lots of really good, nourishing, healthy fats.
Healthy
avocados,
fats,
yeah,
olive oil,
butter,
absolutely,
oils.
all of those ones. Ghee, especially for Vatas, ghee is amazing. It's
So
really
good.
nourishing.
Yeah. And I want to share that it's possible to kick the sugar habit because I've been addicted to sugar my entire life. And in this last few months, I've dropped down to almost none. So it is possible. I was an addict, serious addict. I'd get headaches if I didn't have, and it's not that I ate a lot of pastries, but I had to have enough to feed the beast within.
That's amazing.
So it is possible.
Yeah.
It's possible, and I feel so much better.
Yeah.
I feel so much better.
Yeah.
There's less inflammation and I still get the cravings, but they're less intense. So like you said, Dayna, just over time, just reacclimating the body.
So, and the other piece, the very last piece I share on that is when we're talking about the nutritional side of things is low inflammation diet and fix your digestion. Try not to worry about weight so much, but optimize your digestion. The digestion is the window to what your health is doing. It's also how you're actually going to help remove a lot of the excess estrogen. If that digestive tract is not getting rid of stuff, or if your transit time is too quick, so you've got loose bowels, you're not absorbing your nutrients. These are all really amazing windows to what's happening with our health. So try not to worry about the weight because that might kind of ebb and flow a little bit through these menopause years. Do all the things that you can do and focus on good, healthy digestion. And that means you're not having gas, you're not having bloating, you're going to the bathroom regularly. And that will take care of the connection to the brain that we talked about as well. And what's good for the brain is good for the heart, is good for the gut, and they all connect back and forth. It's like this little internal dialogue that is happening all the time between the three. So if you're taking care of one of the elements, you're naturally kind of taking care of the other.
Oh, Dee, I feel like that's a great transition too. We recorded a Scoop on Poop, the Scoop on Poop episode. So Dayna helped us understand what poop is all about and how it is important to be able to kind of get information from your poop. So that's going to come up maybe next after this
kind of
episode.
Funny, isn't it? And I will also drop one more little nugget for our listeners. I have put together a little guidebook for going through perimenopause. So we'll drop my email in the show notes. Drop me a little email and I will send you off a new little guidebook. And they're just some simple tips. Some of the stuff we talked about today is some basic parameters. I always encourage that, if you can, you get a coach, you build your team because this is a hard time of your life. And if you can put some of your resources into your support team, that can go a very long way. And I'm happy to be a little part of that by sharing some of the top tips that can help us through this time of life. So,
amazing.
What a gift to our listeners. Thank you, Dayna.
Thank you for that, Dee. SoulNet, we hope you enjoyed the episode. Please note that the information we share in our episodes is not medical advice. If there's anything that piques your interest and curiosity, please follow up with your healthcare provider. Thanks for listening.